For more on the U.S. reaction to the Ukraine crisis and the rest of the day's political news, let's bring in Chris Megerian and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Chris is a White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Caitlin is a political reporter for CBS News. Welcome to both of you. Chris, I want to start with you. President Biden handed down even more sanctions on Russia this afternoon. Here's what he had to say about keeping the heat on President Putin.
The only thing that I'm convinced of is if we don't stop now, he'll be emboldened. If we don't move against him now with these significant sanctions, he will be emboldened.
So after hearing that, why isn't President Biden handing down specific sanctions on President Putin as some have urged him to?
So that's an interesting question, and one that he did not directly address today. What President Biden did say that he wanted to leave some more options on the table as Russia continues its operations in Ukraine and continues the invasion. He basically said, let's talk in a month and see where we're at and see how the sanctions are going. So I think the administration is reluctant to roll out everything they have and use every tool they have at their disposal. And they want to kind of evaluate how much of an impact they're having at this point so far.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy released the following statement, quote, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine is reckless and evil. The United States stands with the people of Ukraine and prays for their safety and resolve. Putin's actions must be met with serious consequence. This act of war is intended to rewrite history and, more concerning, upend the balance of power in Europe. Putin must be held accountable for his actions. Caitlin, what stands out to you about Leader McCarthy's words?
Nikole, it was really interesting because he didn't mention the current president, President Biden, and he didn't mention the former President Trump, with whom McCarthy is very close. The one thing uniting Republicans on foreign policy right now is opposition to Biden. You're seeing Republicans rally around this criticism of Biden and his approach to Russia. But when it comes to the actual policy, there are fractures within the party about how to proceed and what the policy is. You have Donald Trump himself weighing in very loudly, calling Putin savvy and smart, really praising the Russian president. You have some of his allies on prominent media networks and platforms echoing that tune and asking, why is the U.S. involved at all? The Trump presidency really scrambled alliances within the Republican Party when it comes to foreign policy. So you have that wing. On the other hand, on Capitol Hill, you have Republican lawmakers who are much more hawkish, who are much more strident in their condemnations of Putin and calling for Biden to make even harsher sanctions. And then you have Republicans on the campaign trail campaigning for Congress. An interesting race right now to watch in that regard is in Ohio, where you had J.D. Vance tapping into the non-interventionist wing, asking why we're caring about Ukraine. Then you have one of his rivals, Jane Timken, a former Republican Party chair, kind of evoking both Reagan and Trump, but arguing that Ohio is home to 80,000 Ukrainian Americans. So you have these fractures within the party that complicate the party in terms of what they want to do moving forward, but it also presents some complications for Biden, who wants to gain consensus and present a united front when facing his biggest foreign policy challenge.
And Caitlin, is there a point at which the president would need congressional support for additional authority to act against Russia?
Well, talk of sanctions have really broken down on Capitol Hill, as you know, and a lot of lawmakers have said that Biden has the authority that he needs to go forward with sanctions. So there isn't the real, same accountability for lawmakers. So it is easier to criticize the administration, although they are still talking about what they can do. And you're going to see more proposals come out, I'm sure. But they are saying that Biden has all the power he needs to wage these sanctions.
Chris, do we know how the president's State of the Union address is shaping up and how prominently this crisis in Ukraine will factor into it?
So we've been asking about preparations for the State of the Union, and there's not really a clear answer at this point. Obviously, there's a lot of things to work through before Biden gives his speech on March 1st. We're expecting him to announce his Supreme Court pick, He's still wrestling with how to respond to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I have to imagine this is all in flux right now, and they're still figuring out exactly how they want to address it.
Yeah, and you just alluded to that, and you wrote about President Biden's impending choice for the Supreme Court last night. Where do things stand in that process?
Yeah, so the White House says that nothing is being held up, nothing's being sidetracked by the invasion of Ukraine, that he still plans to announce his choice by the end of the month. There's only a few days left before the end of the month, so we're still interested to see exactly when that's going to be. The president has done a number of interviews with candidates, and now at this point, from what we can tell, what's left is the decision and the announcement of that decision.
And Caitlin, on the economy, there is some good news. Jobless claims are continuing to drop. They're down 17,000 from the previous week, but inflation continues and the markets are down. So how could this conflict in Ukraine impact the administration's domestic agenda moving forward?
Well, Russia is a top exporter of oil and gas, so there is a concern that we could see higher gas prices here at home as a result of the sanctions waged against Russia, especially those announced today and the ones that others are calling for. So that is a concern here. And you heard Biden address that when he made that address at the White House earlier today. He said that he wants to make this as painless as possible for people here at home. And that was an acknowledgement that that is a concern, and especially a concern for him because he is battling low approval ratings right now. He is in a midterm election year now where Democrats are really facing an uphill climb in terms of keeping their majority in Congress. That has a lot of implications for Biden's agenda. And so you are going to have to see him make this case to Americans. Going back to the State of the Union speech, this, of course, was not probably not something that he had intended to really make a focus of his speech. But you do have a very war-weary public. We have in our own CBS News polling that a majority of the country doesn't think the U.S. should be involved in negotiations around Ukraine and Russia. So there is a lot of explaining to do to the public about why how we are involved here and what the implications for Americans here at home might be. And so that is something that in terms of what the president might talk about and in terms of the challenges to him and his party are compounded by the fact that there is the highest inflation that we've had in 40 years. So even as these good economic numbers come out, there are still these significant challenges for Biden and his administration and for Democrats down the ballot this cycle.
Caitlin Huey-Burns and Chris Megerian, thank you.